People found out that Ellen was mean, and all these people came out and said, Ellen's actually a bitch. And everybody, whoa, I can't believe it. And she lost everything. She fell apart, disappeared, because people found out that this character that she was portraying in a half an hour on a television show is not really who she was. My buddy Greg, who was one of her writers, was like, she's a piece of shit. And he was like, she's a monster.
For nearly 2 decades, Ellen DeGeneres built her entire public identity around 2 words: be kind. It was on the merchandise. It was how she closed every show. It was the brand. And then in the summer of 2020, that brand collapsed almost overnight when current and former employees started talking about what it was actually like to work there. What came out wasn't just a story about one difficult boss. It was a story about how a carefully constructed public image can exist in complete contradiction to the reality behind it, and how long that contradiction can be maintained when everyone around it has reason to stay quiet. Here's the full story of what happened. The Ellen DeGeneres Show ran from 2003 to 2022. Over those 19 years, it became one of the most successful daytime talk shows in television history. Ellen won over 100 Emmys across the show's run. She became the face of celebrity generosity, viral kindness, and mainstream acceptance. She danced onto that stage every day. Audiences believed they were seeing the real person. Behind the scenes, the picture was different. In July 2020, BuzzFeed News published an investigation based on testimonies from more than a dozen former employees. The accounts described a work environment defined by fear, racism, and retaliation. Former staff described being told not to speak to Ellen directly. Others said they had been fired after taking medical leave or bereavement leave. Several Black employees specifically described microaggressions and racially insensitive treatment from senior producers. One former employee said the atmosphere felt like a toxic environment, where people were afraid to speak up. The BuzzFeed investigation opened a flood. More former employees came forward. The accounts multiplied. Senior producers were named specifically. One executive producer was accused of making sexual comments to staff. Another was accused of bullying. A third allegedly created a culture of fear where complaints were dismissed and retaliation was Ellen addressed the allegations in a letter to her staff. She acknowledged that she had relied on other people to run the show as she would want it run, and that clearly some hadn't. She expressed disappointment. She said the show's rapid growth had created gaps she hadn't been aware of. The letter was measured, but it did not directly dispute the specific claims being made. Warner Brothers, the studio behind the show, launched a formal investigation. They interviewed dozens of current and former employees. Their statement confirmed that deficiencies in the show's day-to-day management had been identified. 3 senior producers were later dropped from the show following the investigation. But here's the thing that the investigation didn't fully address. The accounts weren't only about the producers. Multiple sources described a culture that started at the top. Former employees said that Ellen herself was difficult, cold to staff, dismissive, capable of making the work environment uncomfortable for people who crossed her. One of the most specific claims came from guests and industry figures who had interacted with her privately, describing a significant gap between the on-camera warmth and the off-camera behavior. Rosie O'Donnell, who had been close to Ellen for decades. She was one of the guests when Ellen came out in 1996, spoke about the growing distance between them after Ellen's show took off. Rosie described having Ellen hold her newborn babies, knowing her for 30 years, and then being blindsided when Ellen publicly said she didn't know Rosie and they weren't friends. Rosie described the experience as painful and said Ellen had always been a strange creature, someone she and Ellen were not emotionally similar to. In her own words, Rosie said Ellen had the same producers as her own show and had essentially built on the same format. But instead of standing beside her and holding her hand the way Rosie had done for Ellen earlier, Ellen went the opposite direction. The relationship ended without any direct conversation. This dynamic, the public face of warmth combined with a private pattern of cutting people off, appears consistently in how former colleagues and employees describe working with or around Ellen. The timing of the show's cancellation added another layer to the public conversation. In May 2022, Ellen announced the show was ending. She framed it as a creative decision, saying that after nearly 20 years, the show no longer felt like a challenge. But the announcement came in the context of a reputation that had been significantly damaged. Advertisers, viewers, and the broader entertainment press had been watching closely since the 2020 allegations. In December 2022, Stephen Twitchboss, who had become a beloved executive producer and co-host of the show after years as the in-house DJ, died by suicide. He was 40 years old. His wife, Allison Holker, confirmed that he had left a note. She said he had been struggling with something he hadn't fully shared with her. His death devastated the people who knew him and prompted a wide public conversation about mental health, the pressures of the entertainment industry, and what happens behind the scenes of productions that present themselves as celebrations of positivity. The context of his death, coming months after the show ended, following years in which the show's culture had been under scrutiny, led to a significant amount of public speculation. It's important to be clear about what is and isn't verified. There is no confirmed public information establishing that his death was connected to his work on the show or to Ellen specifically. His family has asked for privacy. Speculation that goes beyond what has been confirmed is not fair to him, to his family, or to the truth of who he was. What is documented is the broader question his death raised about what it costs people to work in environments that are publicly presented as joyful and positive, but are privately something different. Ellen's relationship with her own public image became a theme in the aftermath of all of this. Joe Rogan, who had observed the celebrity world since the 1990s, described a pattern he'd seen among certain stars in that era. The way they would be visibly dismissive and rude to people below them on the ladder, then turn on full charm the moment someone with power walked into the room. He said it was common, and that some celebrities treated it as an aspiration, a marker that they had arrived. Several people close to Ellen described exactly that pattern in the accounts that came out in 2020. In late 2024, Ellen and her wife Portia de Rossi moved to the United Kingdom. Multiple reports confirmed the move was motivated primarily by the outcome of the U.S. presidential election. They put their Montecito estate on the market. Ellen had been vocal about her political views throughout the Trump years, and the move was consistent with positions she had taken publicly. After stepping away from television, Ellen has been relatively quiet publicly. In 2025, there were reports of a potential return to entertainment. The reception was mixed. The audience that had once made her show one of the most watched in daytime television had not entirely forgotten what 2020 revealed. What the Ellen story ultimately represents is something the entertainment industry cycles through repeatedly. A public-facing brand built on a specific value, in this case, kindness, that doesn't survive contact with the people who worked to build it. The employees who gave accounts to BuzzFeed weren't looking to destroy someone's career. They were describing their experience in a workplace that had been presented to the world as a model of positivity. The gap between the image and the reality is the story. Not because Ellen is uniquely terrible, the entertainment industry has no shortage of difficult employers, but because she built a 20-year franchise specifically on the premise that she was different, that the energy in that building matched the message on the merchandise. For the people who came forward in 2020, it clearly didn't. The show ended. The producers were removed. The investigation concluded. Whether the accountability was proportionate to what came out is a conversation that's still ongoing in the broader culture. What isn't debatable is that the gap was real, that employees were harmed by it, and that the public image of the Be Kind era was, for a significant number of people who worked inside it, a performance. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Ellen's reputation can ever fully recover? And do you think the entertainment industry has actually changed how it treats the people behind the cameras?